I will say it was with, I guess, somber but feeling good for Eric that we watched him leave the state of Maine and kind of tap the dust off his shoes and cross the border over to some freedom. His story has always seemed to me like a little, maybe a Shakespearean tragedy. I hope it ends better over here. But he's railed for freedom and fought for freedom in the state of Maine, only to see us slip further and further into the kind of soft despotism that Alexis de Tocqueville warned about. So if anything, hopefully I can be a reminder for Free Staters about what the alternative is, because Maine can certainly not be described as a free state. So I think the reason I'm here, as Eric said, is because I am the publisher of the Maine Wire, which I guess can best be understood as a journalism startup and I guess a digital media outlet. I've been running that for about 3 years now. It's older than that. It started about 11 or 12 years ago. But I took it over and we've really revitalized it and greatly built the staff, and I think everyone would agree that it's a different project now since I've returned to Maine and taken it over. And as we've tried to build a journalism project from the ground up, I've learned some valuable lessons about what it's like covering a hostile state, a tyrannical state, and also what it's like doing investigative reporting on organized crime and politics, which I would argue are just two sides of the same coin at this point in Maine. But before I get into the lessons that we've learned from trying to build the Maine Wire and trying to do journalism at the state level that holds power to account, I'd like to just tell you a little bit about me, where I come from, and brandish some of my libertarian bona fides now that Mr. Brakey has told you I once supported Marco Rubio. I grew up in Maine, a little town called Dexter, Maine. We used to have a shoe factory there. Warren Buffett bought it, outsourced it overseas, destroyed the town. Now the biggest commodity, or the biggest employer, is the public schools. I think the biggest commodity is fentanyl. I went to college in Maine and spent a little bit of time in DC and Boston. As Eric said, I kind of cut my teeth in the media world, working for Howie Carr, who I think has 8 stations throughout New Hampshire. And he's not a libertarian, but I imagine he's entertaining for some libertarians who can set aside that aspect of him. After that, I went and worked for Barstool Sports, and I think the podcast that I was producing for Barstool Sports, the Kirk Minahan Show, if people aren't familiar with it, can best be understood as something along the lines of Howard Stern. It was a comedy, very kind of touched on politics sometimes, but didn't really delve too deeply into it as a matter of course, and that was a refreshing break for me to dip out of politics for a little bit. And then I ended at Barstool by doing an investigative cold case podcast with Kirk, and we tried to solve a 30-year-old missing persons case out of Brockton, Massachusetts, and produced an 8-episode series that ended up getting 4 or 5 million downloads. It was a very successful cold case podcast for a platform that's known for its comedy podcasts, and we actually ended up getting a accidental overdose death was reopened, and then homicide charges were filed against the person we thought was responsible for the disappearance 30 years ago. So that's kind of where I got my taste for long-form investigative journalism. In the middle of COVID, I decided to quit my jobs, drop out of society. My wife and I got a camper van. You can see it. It's parked, the big black van over there that looks like a CIA spy van. And we just drove around the country and dropped out of society for a little while and spent a lot of time reflecting on what exactly we wanted to do with the rest of our lives, professionally, personally, where we wanted to go and put roots down. We'd met in college, so we were familiar with Maine. We were familiar with the Brunswick area. So we decided that we wanted to, buy a house there and try to build a life there. Along the way, I edited not Saifedean's The Bitcoin Standard, but his second book, The Fiat Standard, as well as his third book, The Principles of Economics. So I am a hardcore Bitcoiner and a big supporter of that, and that comes through, I hope, in our journalistic coverage when Eric, who was then Senator Brakey, gives a letter to President Biden urging the pardon of Ross Ulbricht. We were there to cover that when he introduced bills to have a state bank that was 100% reserve currency. No other journalist in the state of Maine understood what reserve, even for what fractional reserve was, but that we were there to cover that and understood the importance of some of the hard money and individual sovereignty legislation that Eric was trying to bring forward. So fast forward to where we are now. Came back to Maine. I was able to raise some money. The Maine Wire exists through philanthropy. We started out with me part-time, just kind of scraping along and trying to prove that there was an appetite and an audience for journalism done in a different way. And we were right. And over the last 2.5 years, we're now up to 9 full-time employees, including myself. We've taken the Maine Wire website from 25,000 views in a month to 25,000 views in a day. And we've seen 3,000% growth across all of our social media platforms, to the point now where, we're averaging, if you add all of our social media platforms and web properties together, somewhere between 50 and 75 million impressions in a given month. So we've had extraordinary success building a media outlet that doesn't follow the conventional philosophies that the other outlets do in the state of Maine. And I guess before I go further, it's necessary to delve a little bit into the media landscape that Maine has right now. There really is no media outlet in Maine right now that is not taxpayer funded to some extent, other than the Maine Wire. Or funded by money from George Soros and Hans-Jörg Weiss and billionaires who are hostile to libertarian ideals, to traditional family ideals, to basically everything that the people at PorcFest would find dear. The Press Herald was recently purchased by a trust fund, the National Trust for Local News. They operate the majority of the newspapers in the state. They get contracts, no-bid contracts from the state of Maine to publish articles that are favorable to the governor. The Bangor Daily News, which holds itself out as the largest independent newspaper in the state, we reported exclusively has received $2.4 million in no-bid contracts from our governor, Janet Mills, because they also run a public affairs company. So it's very convenient that the state's largest independent newspaper, so-called, also runs a public affairs company that can take $2.4 million in no-bid contracts. And then, of course, we have Maine Public, which is just your NPR affiliate subsidized journalism. So you can imagine the kind of influence that level of government funding might have over news outlets. If you know that the Mills administration is handing out $2.4 million in COVID grants to do, vaccine awareness, how likely are you going to be to do critical reporting on COVID-19 policies? Not very likely. You're not going to bite the hand that feeds you. So the media in Maine has been totally co-opted. And to the extent that they haven't been co-opted by their own business interests or their own selfish interests, I think the biggest bias is just laziness. There's a laziness that pervades the newsrooms in Maine as well as the newsrooms everywhere. This is probably true in New Hampshire as well. And the bias is just pure laziness. There's an idea that reporters, so-called, or journalists, so-called, have that every story can be told from sitting behind their laptop computer, or even that all the stories that are interesting are going to come to you in a press release from the government. I just don't think that's true. And I've had the real joy of trying to coach up some young journalists and teach them a new way of approaching investigative reporting in the state of Maine. And the basic thing that I tell them is to forget everything that you learned about civics. The only important decisions coming out of Augusta or Concord or Washington, D.C., there's 2 important decisions. One is how much money are we going to steal from people? And 2, how are we going to give it away in a manner that allows us to steal more next time around? Those are the 2 important decisions. So I tell them, like, the governor's going to send out press releases, the Republicans are going to send out press releases, all these people are going to send out press releases. You're not there to quote and repeat those press releases. That's just a piece of information that is added to your story as you go out and find information about what this organized crime racket that calls itself the government is actually doing. We're not here to report what the government says it's doing or what political actors say they're doing. We're here to report what they're actually doing, what the actual consequences of that are. That's true of the State House, and that's true of local governments, and it's also true of schools. I think one of the areas where our reporting has really distinguished itself from the other outlets, which I guess you could call legacy media or mainstream media, government-funded media. One of the areas where we've distinguished ourselves is in our coverage of what's happening in the schools. The bias that I've seen time and time again is for the mainstream outlets to just accept whatever a superintendent or a politician says is happening in the schools as 100% truth. We found that that's not the case, and we find no reason whatsoever to privilege the lived experience of the superintendent over that of parents who know what's happening with their kids, know the reality of what's happening in schools. So it's a little bit harder to dig in and find out what the parents are saying, what the truth is, what the students are saying. It's inherently dangerous every time you're reporting on something happening with kids. I shouldn't say dangerous, but it's ethically, it adds a new dimension to it when you're reporting on something that involves minors. But I think it's important because this is one of the largest state projects that we have in Maine. This is where they're in an intellectually way, they're touching our kids first at the schools, sometimes, unfortunately, in the physical way as well. But reporting on education is very important in Maine, especially because the public school system is one of the largest employers in the entire state. The teachers union is the largest union in the state, has a tremendous influence over politics. So I think we've distinguished ourselves in the approach that we bring to reporting on politics by trying to get beyond the press releases and trying to report on things that actually matter to families in Maine, as opposed to some of the stories that may go viral on the internet, but at the end of the day aren't really that consequential for people. One of the stories that really has helped the Maine Wire grow has been our investigative reporting into Chinese organized crime in the state of Maine. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the phenomenon at this point. I'll wait until maybe we're done beeping. The truck has heard about the Chinese organized crime. Hopefully it's not a truck bomb. So we've done a lengthy investigative series that we've called Triad Weed about how certain Chinese criminal groups from New York and Massachusetts have come into the state of Maine and exploited and undermined the state's cannabis legalization program in order to become fabulously wealthy. Some of them are anyways. It's an operation that abuses the land, abuses our housing. There's human trafficking, sex trafficking. And according to the Department of Homeland Security, there are more than 270 houses in rural Maine that have been co-opted, purchased, and put into use by these criminal organizations to grow cannabis. You might be thinking, cannabis, it's legal in Maine, who cares, the more the merrier. It is, but these people are doing it illicitly, and they're undermining legal growers who in some cases have invested their life savings into starting cannabis businesses, and they're now going out of business because of the illegal, illicit competition that's using pesticides, fungicides, is using slave labor, is stealing in some cases, stealing electricity. So they're cutting corners on everything that they're doing and undercutting legitimate marijuana businesses who thought that if you just played by the rules that the state of Maine had laid down, you'd be able to start a business, grow a business, and put out a good product. But that hasn't been the case. So we, early on, after we first learned about this phenomenon happening in Maine, kind of decided that it would be a very good project to take on as a deep investigative dive, because it was a story that you didn't come to with pre-baked, sorry the pun, partisan conclusions. There's a lot of the Maine Wire being affiliated with a conservative think tank. We get you guys are just a Republican mouthpiece. You're just, GOP propaganda, which, the Republicans bitch at me more than anybody in the state, so I don't really see that angle. But it's nonetheless something that we have to overcome, a perception or a bias that we have to overcome. And so I thought that a long-form investigative project into Chinese organized crime operating in the state on this topic of cannabis, illicit cannabis growing, would be something where we could kind of show our flex our investigative reporting muscles on something that's not strictly partisan and doesn't really benefit one partisan tribe or the other. And I think it's something that we've done very effectively to show people that we're interested in helping to convey to people the reality of what's happening in the state of Maine. And now we've gotten to the point where we've produced a 90-minute feature-length documentary about the topic. And I haven't said this anywhere publicly yet, but we will be publishing that online a couple of weeks from now, and the Tucker Carlson Network is going to distribute that for us. So hopefully we'll get some eyeballs on that. So that's kind of been our approach to building out the Maine Wire, and I think that The strategy has been tried to do libertarian or conservative media outlets before. They inevitably devolve into just opinion repositories. Who's written the latest op-ed for the Cato Institute or Heritage Action or whatever? Let's just repost them on a website. Nobody wants to see that. Nobody's going to a website for the latest, scorching opinion takes from somebody in D.C. who was probably paid by some group to write it anyways, if they wrote it. So we wanted to focus on doing original investigative reporting that people can't get elsewhere. We wanted to focus on giving people a fresh perspective, and because almost everybody who works at the Maine Wire is somewhere on the spectrum from conservative to libertarian, we focus on the issues that are important to people who have that similar perspective. So we offer a product that is not really available and is not reflected in the traditional media, and that's part of the reason why we've seen such substantial growth. And we've also embraced a way of publishing our media that the other outlets really haven't. The other outlets haven't really gotten past you print a newspaper, you do an evening TV broadcast. That's all they know. So they don't post their stories on social media. They don't post video to social media. They don't really use new technologies, and they really haven't had to because there's been no competition in the state of Maine forcing them to innovate. So we've taken advantage of their kind of blind spot when it comes to social media and new technologies that could be used to distribute information. So we're using Substack to distribute long-form podcasts. We use all of our social media platforms to distribute both long and short form video. We'll do clips from the legislative floor. There's plenty of clips we've put out of Senator Brakey, whether it was railing against the war in Ukraine or trying to get the sales tax suspended on gold and silver. And so, yeah. So we've, I think the relationship that Eric and I have had over the years kind of highlights, I think, the importance of having libertarian-minded or conservative-minded people, or really just people who don't instinctively trust the state. People who have a healthy skepticism of what the state says. That's how you're going to highlight the things happening in society and in politics that libertarians need to know about, that conservatives need to know about, and that the state doesn't want you to know about. When Eric asked me to do this talk and asked me to come up with a title for it, I thought, Tyranny hates journalism would be good. It sounds a little grandiose, and I know that journalists are kind of prone to this self-aggrandizing Jim Acosta bullshit, where journalism has become it's some sacred priesthood. You have to be Jake Tapper or Jim Acosta, or going back even further, Woodard and Bernstein, who were probably just tools of the CIA. But you've got to be one of this select club in order to get the information from the important people and then hand it down to the little people, the serfs. I don't believe that at all. I don't buy into that, and I'm deeply uncomfortable even identifying as a journalist, just because the brand and the name has been ruined by the people who claim to practice it. I think journalism is best understood as just a trade. Anybody can do journalism. There's no the one person that I've had to fire was actually a journalism school graduate from a pretty prestigious journalism school. Couldn't do journalism. Not at least the way we wanted it done, in the English language and grammatically correct. So we tend to hire people for their iconoclasm. We want people who are skeptical of the state, skeptical of power, skeptical even of the things that I say. We want people who are, by their nature, very skeptical, who ask the right questions. And I think we've had some success finding those people, but it's very, very difficult. We have to hire classics majors. We have to hire from we can't hire anybody from the Ivy League. Hiring has become a real challenge, finding people who are going to be aggressive and people who are going to be curious, and people who haven't fallen for this idea of journalism as the person who gets invited to the after party at an election and gets to hang out with the politicians and gets, high on their proximity to power. I want to hire people who are, their worst possible evening would be spent, rubbing elbows with politicians. I want to hire people who just want to spend time with their families and just want to be left alone by the state, and who are convicted in the same way I am that the state is essentially an organized crime racket. So I think that the the trade of journalism needs to be saved from journalists in many ways. I don't want to be, 10 years from now, I do not want to be a journalist. I'd like to be, fly fishing or working as an electrician or something. I think it's just it's a necessary tool to use in order to save our freedom, to protect our rights, and to limit the growth of the state. And I'll just give some examples from my own experience of reporting on what we're seeing in the state of Maine, which I really can't stress enough how dark things are in Maine. The COVID stuff, which I mostly escaped, I didn't realize living for the beginning of it in Massachusetts how bad things had gotten in Maine. It was really just a executive tyranny. The governor suspended the legislature, suspended religious worship, enforced vaccine mandates, even tried to kick the Maine Wire out of the COVID-19 press briefings, labeling us advocacy journalists, when I would say we're just adversarial journalists, not advocacy journalists. We're not advocating for anything except for maybe freedom, rights, limited government. But as Eric, I'm sure can attest to, I don't think there are any libertarians right now in the state legislature. Really, I don't think there's anyone who would identify as a libertarian, or even maybe there's a libertarian-leaning conservative at the moment. But the policies that we have come out are certainly all one mantra: progressive, big government, subsidize this, subsidize that, limit human freedom. Limit due process, limit firearms. So it has really just been a full-on charge for the last 6 or 7 years to curtail and restrict human liberty in the state of Maine, which is really unfortunate. And the reason why I've opted to do the Maine Wire as a project to save Maine, and again, that sounds like grandiose journalism bullshit, but it's the one thing I think I can do is to write and tell stories and to do investigative reporting that may help other people see what's going on. If you ask me, the frog in Maine has been boiling for about 10 minutes. They don't know it because the journalists in the state of Maine haven't told them. They haven't effectively communicated the reality of politics on the ground in the state of Maine, and so people don't know what's going on, and they can't vote as if their rights are under threat. They can't vote as if their freedom is under threat if there's no one there who is telling them. If they're only checking out the Bangor Daily News, which again got $2.4 million in no-bid contracts as a public affairs company for the governor, if they're only reading the Bangor Daily News, how are they going to be able to trust that information? How are they going to know that they're not getting a tilted, slanted version of the story? So the Maine Wire is there to fill the gap and to focus on those issues. Some of the classic examples which could be replicated here. I'm sure there are some free staters who have news websites or news type operations here. I know that there are a couple of right of center news operations in New Hampshire, unlike in Maine where there's really only one. Some of the recent successes that we've had have been on no-bid contracts and just trying to do the very basic act of figuring out how the government spends money with no accountability. We have been the only ones in the state of Maine who have delved into the contracts that the state spends just because some bureaucrat at the state says, I think we should spend money with this person. That person happens to be like their brother's company or their sister's nonprofit or a company that's turning around to give them campaign contributions. And we actually succeeded with a friend and former colleague of Eric's, David Boyer, in motivating the legislature to pass legislation that's going to bring some extra transparency to the no-bid contract process. So in an ideal world, that's how the relationship between journalism and politics would work. Journalists can go out and identify a problem, and enough people can come together, whether they're voters or politicians, and say, "Hey, yeah, that's a problem. Let's create a fix for that. Let's go out and propose some legislation and go fix that problem." With the reality of progressive, big government control in Augusta, doesn't always work that way. Sometimes it feels like you're tilting at windmills when you're, writing from a libertarian perspective or a conservative perspective in the state of Maine. Doesn't always pan out. But then we always have content to write about. We always have something to complain about in the future. Some other investigations that we've done, for example, we found that in the schools, the there's this trend towards school-based clinics. I don't know if anybody is familiar with the school-based clinic, but we actually got onto this because a father found that his 15-year-old daughter, had been sent home with Zoloft in a little baggie, not labeled, without his knowledge or consent. We're like, what? The schools are handing out SSRIs without informing the parents? And the more we dug, the more we found that these school-based clinics were popping up at like 25 different school districts throughout the state of Maine. And the way they function is they open up as a separate nonprofit medical provider right in the school. And because they're a separate medical provider, the superintendent or principal can say, hey, I don't know what's going on over there. That's a totally separate entity. And because they're a medical provider, they can say, well, all this is patient privacy. We don't have to talk to you about the SSRIs from Big Pharma we're handing out to 15-year-olds without their parents' knowledge or consent. So we started digging into these and eventually found that this specific nonprofit lists in their public tax documents that something like 70 or 75% of their revenue comes from prescription drugs. So they're not a health clinic. We are so far past the days when you used to have to sign like 10 permission slips just to get an aspirin or a Band-Aid from the school nurse. We're now at a point where large pharmaceutical companies have effectively used these nonprofits to co-opt our public school system and begin the pipeline when they're 14 and 15 years old. And it's being celebrated by people who think that it's a step forward in favor of public health. And there was no reporting on this whatsoever. Still to this day, not another outlet in the state of Maine has picked up our reporting on these, public, the school-based clinics that they're trying to operate, which I just find flabbergasting, which is a word I use a lot to describe when we report on something that I think is incredibly important and sensational, and then the rest of the media just kind of, yawns about it. And there's, time and time again, we find that our reporting, because we come with this perspective of being skeptical of the state and just operating from the assumption that the state is dastardly and evil and wants to restrict our liberty and steal from us, and we work kind of backward from that to try to prove that maybe something is not as evil as we thought it was. Time and time again, we find ourselves out on an island trying to convince people that something we care about and something that we've studied at length is actually newsworthy, and they should pay attention to it. And it's been an uphill battle, but I think that, in terms of our growth, we are succeeding. More and more people are, coming up to me and saying, I've been a lifelong Democrat, whatever their story is, discovered you because of your work on the Chinese organized crime in the state, but I love what you're doing. I love your approach to this. I love that you'll, get in a politician's face with a camera and ask some hard questions. And, I think that's the approach that we're taking to try and build our own little freedom movement in the state of Maine. It's a hard sell to convince people to move to Maine if they like freedom, especially when New Hampshire is right next door. You guys are making it real tough for us. but yeah, please continue succeeding to make it tough for us, because it's a great model for us to hold up and say, hey, we're pretty much the same as New Hampshire. Why do we have to live in tyranny with 8% tax rates and just become effectively a wilderness conservation land beholden to elites living on the coast of Maine? It's a dark times in Maine. Can't say that enough, how bad things are in Maine right now. But we have a big chance in 2026. Maybe the state and their elections could take a step towards freedom, a step in favor of liberty and curtailing the rapid growth of the government. And I'm hopeful that the Maine Wire can continue to grow and can continue to provide an alternative perspective to voters, to politicians, and continue to do the investigative reporting that is, I think, essential for identifying and drawing attention to some of the flaws, some of the just outright corruption of our politics, so that those problems can be fixed. And that being said, I'll leave some time for questions. If anybody has questions about journalism, Chinese cannabis, some of the challenges that we faced as we tried to do journalism at the state level, challenges making the money, the bottom line work, funding an operation, because the news media space is definitely in the middle of a crisis when it comes to finding a way to operate, to get the bills paid. And unfortunately, a lot of outlets are taking, the Soros money or the government money in order to stay afloat. So I'm happy to answer any of those questions, or I can tell you about Eric Brakey stories or something like that. But yes, sir.
Earlier in your talk, you said something about organized crime and the state legislature. Was that one topic or two?
But I thought it was two, but now I'm of the belief that it's just the one.
So you clearly have to view the other publications in the state to see what they're saying and to know what truth they're not telling. Have you considered having an annual award? We could call it the Jason Blair Award.
Yes, we have considered having our own awards for journalists. Actually, Eric's old friend Steve Collins would probably be at the top of the list. But we do have in Maine, we have the Maine Press Association, which annually gives out awards to the biggest liars and lickspittles, in my opinion. And I've made it abundantly clear to everyone at the Maine Wire that the only fireable offense here is getting an award from the Maine Press Association. If you get any recognition from the Maine Press Association, you're out. You're out. But we have thought about coming up with our alternative award system. But to be frank, I mean, we haven't done it because we're focused on things that are deadly serious. When I say organized crime, I don't mean that in a glib way. I mean, we've visited and knocked on the doors of hundreds of Chinese mafia strongholds in the state of Maine. We've, as a result of our reporting, there's been more than 60 search warrants executed at locations across rural Maine where, large amounts of drugs, illicit chemicals, pesticides have been confiscated, where victims of human trafficking have also been identified. There's 5 or 6 different sex trafficking rings in the state of Maine that have been busted up, businesses operating, supposedly as massage parlors. So we're, very focused on, the serious aspect of our work, even though we do bring a kind of brash sense of humor to what we do, because I think that that's important and helps distinguish us. So I'm not saying that we won't do those awards. It just hasn't been high up on the list. But I will say another thing on the organized crime front. We were so deep into the weeds on the Chinese mafia taking over rural Maine that we were looking over land records and deed records and property records. And we came across this one record related to a property and saw the name of the signatory on it was a guy named Paul Mills, who turns out to be the brother of Governor Janet Mills, who was helping Chinese nationals do land transfers for properties that law enforcement and code enforcement described as illicit marijuana grows. So the governor's brother was getting paid to help Chinese organized crime in the state of Maine. That's another story. Not another newspaper in the state of Maine has covered it. We went around the State House with a copy of the land transfer document printed out, and we're handing it out to other journalists and politicians. I mean, we're spoon-feeding these people the big stories in the state of Maine, and they still can't handle them. But yeah, to your original point, for me, the organized crime thing, they're just one and the same. Some people wear fancy ties and suits and tell you that they're important because some people voted for them, but those are often the slickest, dirtiest criminals that you have to pay attention to the most.
Are you familiar with the granite grok?
I am, yes, yeah. Granite Grok, NH Review. I think you guys have a kind of because of the freedom culture that the Free Staters have built here, you guys have people who are willing to actually come out and have those outlets. It's been tremendously hard in the state of Maine to get people to talk with us because the state in Maine has built a culture of fear and retribution, to the point where nobody wants to come out and talk about what they've seen, even if it's just outright corruption, like bribery or the government taking taxpayer money and giving it to the close friends of people, like outright illegal corruption. People are scared to death, and they should be, because the state has shown in a very real way that it's willing to crack down on dissent. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Dr. Meryl Nass. She was a doctor in Ellsworth, Maine. She was a critic of the COVID regime and the Faucianism. And she went on the radio and leveled criticisms of what the federal and state government were doing around COVID. And she's just a country bumpkin doctor from Ellsworth who, oh, by the way, is the world's leading expert on anthrax, the anthrax vaccine, Gulf War syndrome, and testified to Congress multiple times. So we don't need to listen to what she has to say. I'm sure that the staffers in the governor's office know better than the rest of us, than Dr. Meryl Nass, what's going on. But she was actually hunted down for spreading disinformation That's the emails that they got through the lawsuit. She was targeted for spreading disinformation, even though she was right about everything. And they took her medical license away, and she still doesn't have her medical license right now. The state medical board came after her, and we found an email where the governor's sister emailed somebody on the medical board saying, hey, I don't know if you saw this, but you might want to take a look at the things this doctor is saying on the radio. So very real culture of retribution and fear in the state. Another one, Rick Savage, the guy who operated Sunday River Brewing Company just across the border in Bethel. He didn't have his plexiglass correctly installed, or I don't know exactly what it was. Really, it was he went on Tucker Carlson's show and talked shit about the governor. That's what got him. Yes, well, that's your right, I think. Yeah, I think it's his right. I think honestly, I think Rick's a hero, and he's actually. This will sound familiar. He's living in New Hampshire now, running a business in New Hampshire. He's another exile, refugee from the state of Maine. But those are two pretty high-profile examples. But the effect of that downstream on other government employees when it comes to coming forward and saying, "Hey, this is corrupt. This is tyranny," has been one of the biggest challenges we've had to overcome. Just to give an example, in the run-up to the 2022 election, Governor Mills decides to send out another batch of COVID checks. It's more free money from the printing press, and unlike the previous payments, which had been electronic transfers just into people's bank accounts, she made sure that these were sent as letters with a note from the governor saying, hey, this is Janet Mills, here's $350. The checks landed a month before the election was going to go down. It was a very Trumpian move on her part, to be honest. But we wanted to figure out how much was the added cost to taxpayers of sending letters rather than doing electronic transfers. And so I finally get the guy on the phone who's responsible for basically like putting stamps on envelopes. He runs the government, the state, post office. And I asked him, how much do stamps cost? And he immediately realized what I was trying to get at. And he said, what are you trying to do to me? I got 4 kids and an ex-wife to feed. I was like, excuse me? He was like, you know what they're going to do to me if I talk to you? I was like, I just want to know how much a stamp costs. And this low-level state employee immediately recognized that I would put his life, his liberty, and his property in jeopardy if he told me how much a stamp cost. Like, that's the kind of culture of fear and retribution that we're dealing with in the state of Maine. It makes it really, really hard to report and to build sources and to build confidence with people that you're going to keep their name off the record, that you're going to find a way to report critically important information without revealing their identities. A lot of what I do is just building those source relationships until people who have that information get comfortable that they can trust me with it. That's a long answer to your question.
Yes.
But.
I have immense respect for what Steve McDonald is doing with the Granite Grok, but he certainly hasn't had your measure of success. I'm certain he does not have 9 full-time employees.
Yeah, well, we've been very lucky. I mean, we are funded, through philanthropy, so we rely on donors who buy into what we're doing. We're trying to decentralize our model and go more to we're using Substack to go through a subscription model so that people can contribute and support what we're doing. But it's a real threat. The bottom line is people just don't want to pay for news. They don't. People aren't going to pay 99 cents here, 99 cents there, $1 here, $5 here. No one wants to pay for news, and they're accustomed to getting information for free from Facebook and from Twitter. So our approach, instead of putting everything behind a paywall and forcing you to pay to figure out what's going on in your schools, or your town council, or your state house, is to make everything available for free, but also offer those subscriptions so that if you see what we're doing, you're going to say, you know what, I like the information that they're bringing to me. I like their approach to flipping over rocks. I like the dirty little corners that these guys are plumbing. I want to support them so that they can continue to do that. So that's been our approach, and we're very much, again, we're a startup media outlet. So we're struggling like every outlet in the country with how do we make this endurable, because just like the government employees are afraid to come and support what we're doing, advertisers don't want to support what we're doing because we make politicians mad. When you're reporting on the governor's brother's connections to transnational organized crime, I mean, this is the woman again who went after Meryl Nass, who went after Rick Savage. Do you want to be seen advertising with Steve Robinson when he's the most hated media figure in the state of Maine? It's a huge challenge for us. But I love what Granite Grok is doing. I think we have a republication agreement with the NH Review, and so we try to reboost our partners who are kind of swimming in the same lane as us in other states. And I do, long-term have a vision for bringing the Maine Wire and reporting more on what's happening in New Hampshire in the same way that the Boston Globe, views itself as the regional New England paper of record. I'd like the Maine Wire to eventually become the outlet of record for all of New England. But it's, we're making progress. We're growing there. But yeah, I love Granite Grok, NH Review. I'm surprised they're not here as media sponsors.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Good idea for next year.
Thank you for the courage to do what you're doing. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Steve, thank you so much for coming out. So I've taken my finger off the pulse of Maine politics since I made the move to New Hampshire. And
we miss you.
Oh, I appreciate that. And I miss the people of Maine. And I haven't given up on the people of Maine. I mean, I've given up on the idea that the state, as it's currently configured, there's any path to liberty at this point in time. But considering you, I know we've talked about this idea a bit over time, and you've got your finger on the pulse of what's going on within the conservative movement, in particular in Maine. How bad does it have to get in Maine before the people of the 2nd District start seriously considering seceding and joining New Hampshire?
I mean, I think we're there. Honestly, I think I would say probably you and I are the foremost advocates of this plan. It should be acknowledged that we're the highest profile people kicking around this idea. But, I think that if we don't see some very real change around the 2026 elections, then you're going to see that become more and more something that's talked about. The problem is the lines aren't clear cut. There's some, the concentration. They've succeeded to a very, very unfortunate degree of concentrating economic power in left-wing strongholds because everything flows through the government. Even the construction companies that you would think are just like, oh, those guys got to be business people, right of center, they're capitalists and conservatives. No, they're all just reliant on government money. It's like 80% of the state is reliant on government money in some form or fashion. So there are some economic challenges to figuring out how you would do it. But I think that we have a state that is, I think is right of center and libertarian, and we're controlled by a fringe minority of radical leftists that are about like 30% of the state. In a recent poll from UNH, the number one concern or fear that voters in Maine had was radical progressivism by like 15 or 17%. And that's astonishing. Usually when you do these what is your top concern polls, the result is, the economy, terrorism, they list out the usual suspects. So to have a plurality of people come forward and say, my biggest fear are the people who are in charge right now. That is a wild, wild place to be in. And I don't think that voters, media people in the state of Maine have fully reckoned with the consequences of that, and that the extent to which people who favor freedom and a different way of life than having everything centrally managed by the state, I don't think that they fully reconciled with how disenfranchised a large, large swath of people in Maine have become. And the question is, I think, are they going to give in to, again, what Tocqueville would have called individualism, which is where, you retreat into your own personal sphere, your private sphere, and kind of say, I don't want to go to the town meeting, I don't want to go to the school board meeting, I'm just going to take care of my family, go to church, go to Rotary, whatever. That was what Tocqueville saw as individualism, and he saw it as a threat to free democracies if people would do this. I think that's one path that people in Maine who are disenfranchised with politics could go down, is just say, you know what? Bleep, I'm done. I don't want anything to do with it. Nothing good's coming out of here. Yeah. Or they could go that other path and channel it into activism and find some vigor and try to fight for freedom in the state of Maine in the same way that free staters are fighting for it here in New Hampshire. So I hope they go down that path.
It did certainly seem to me like when I came back to Maine at the tail end of COVID, for those who don't know, I was in Austin, Texas for a while working for Young Americans for Liberty. I felt like I came home to a state where the conservative movement that was once so, and by conservative I mean broadly, including the liberty movement that had, kind of staked its claim on a lot of the Republican Party there. Certainly, I came back to a state where it felt like people were just so demoralized after everything that had gone through in COVID, and no consequences for the people who did it, no apology ever given. But I want to ask you too, and then I'll turn it over. I'm glad to see a few more questions. So this will be my last question. Something I've noticed in both Maine and New Hampshire lately is establishment politicians, particularly in the Democratic Party lately, or left of center, aging out, and their kids are running to like continue on these dynasties, right? You have Hannah Pingree running for governor, the daughter of Congresswoman Shelley Pingree. You have Angus King III, who nobody knew existed.
I didn't know. I knew Angus when I was at college. He was a professor at Bowdoin when I was there.
Oh, yeah?
I've known him forever. So, I didn't know he had a third.
Yeah, so...
I hope there's not a fourth.
Yeah, I didn't know Angus King II was the second.
Oh, God.
Oh. So, and of course here in New Hampshire, there's Jean Shaheen, who's retiring, and I guess her daughter is now running for Congress. And to be fair, I mean, there's like the Sununu dynasty in New Hampshire. I'm not to say it's totally on one side of the aisle, but it does seem to be disproportionately something I'm seeing in these, and maybe it's not unique to the northern New England states, it's just the two I see the most. Seeing a lot of these Democrat dynasties of these old ideologies that have fallen out of favor, that are trying to kind of maintain control beyond the grave of these current folks. What do you make of these dynasties that seem to be trying to cling to power?
Well, I mean, shouldn't we just assume that they've learned the joy of selfless public service from their parents? No, they've learned the business model. I mean, that's what it is. They've seen their parents, achieve this clout and enrich themselves, and in some cases we see it as, it's a family business. Like, it turns out that the Senate president during your last term in the Maine legislature, Troy Jackson, his son just happens to be a lobbyist in the state legislature, who is the second or third top billing lobbyist for the entire session, while his dad is the Senate president. Well, I mean, when you're paying this guy to do lobbying, are you paying him for his services, or are you paying him because he's the son of the guy who controls the Senate?
It was interesting to notice that, for those who don't know Maine politics, the Senate president at the time, Troy Jackson, Democrat from way up north in Aroostook County, had always gotten elected as the pro-gun, pro-life.
Yes.
Democrat from Aroostook County, and in his last term, his son takes a job lobbying for every town for gun sense, take your guns away, and suddenly he's flipping on all of these long-held positions.
Exactly.
As his son's getting paid to lobby for those positions.
Yeah, he's been a gun rights guy for 20 years, and we found video of his son, the lobbyist, shooting shotguns and drinking beer in a sand pit, but they get $50,000 from the gun grabbers, and all of a sudden they come out and support gun control. But that's an answer to your question, is that it's a business model at this point. The Pingrees, I think they've made enough money at this point where maybe that isn't a concern for them. Probably is true of Angus King as well. But they've learned that there's a lot of money to be made in their brand of politics. There's not a lot of money to be made in shrinking the state. All the money comes from growing the state and increasing taxes. And Angus King was a wind power profiteer. Got huge Recovery Act money for wind power. We're still suffering from the higher cost of energy because of what he did and the new restrictions and more government control over energy markets that he brought about. So I'm sure that he's looking to hand off the baton to his son. And Shelley Pingree or Hannah Pingree, I think, is the same. We do have this. This dynastic problem, but it's not because they've learned public service. It's because they've learned the business model. And unfortunately, I could tell, and hopefully there's a lot of us, statesmen like you in New Hampshire who are inherently uncomfortable with government power and with, asking the government to do new things. It's exactly the opposite with a lot of these people on the left and a lot of the dynastic political families we see in Maine. They view the government as just a tool to enrich themselves and to bend society to their way. And they seem oblivious to the negative consequences that is having for the state of Maine. A side effect of our investigation into the Chinese organized crime in the state of Maine, we had to drive all over the state of Maine. Probably put 8,000 miles on my car or van driving around and looking for these properties, but I also got to see a lot of Maine and a lot of the way things are. And it's sad.
Yeah.
It's really disheartening for me to see that Maine has fallen on such hard times between business closures, schools closing. Well, that's a good thing. Maybe they get reopened as private schools or charter schools or something like that. But to see communities suffering in real despair at the same time that our budget over the last 6 years has gone from a $7 billion a year budget to a $12 billion a year budget now. And that doesn't include the $15 billion in magic COVID money that just appeared in the state. And it's like, well, where did all that money go? Because I don't see signs of it in the rural poverty and in communities outside of, Cape Elizabeth and the coastal blue communities that Hannah Pingree represents. So it's sad, but I think that the gig is up. I think that people are kind of cottoning on to this idea that we shouldn't have all of our politicians coming from one family. I think that an endorsement for Angus King is not going to be salubrious to your political health this time around. I think people are wising up to it finally, and really, that's part of what the Maine Wire is trying to do. We're trying to provide information that we think is important for people as they make political decisions, whether it's elected official voting on something, a private citizen just going out and voting, on election day, or deciding to attend a rally, or whatever it is, deciding to run for office themselves. We're there to exist as information. Really, we're there to take the information that pisses us off and just hold it up and put a spotlight on it and say, this should piss you off too, and you could do something about it. So that's the function that we've played, and hopefully we will continue to play a role in getting people to be inherently suspicious of these dynastic political legacies, which,
awesome.
I mean, it's kind of funny, the No Kings rally.
Angus King III is literally there at the No Kings rally.
They're the same people who are voting for, billionaire legacies. I can do some questions quick.
I want to make sure, I'll say real quick, then I'll hand it over. So come 2026, if it doesn't flip around in Maine, I'll find someone in the New Hampshire House of Representatives to file a resolution inviting the 2nd District to break away and join New Hampshire. And then Congressman Paul LePage can finally say he kept his promise to abolish the income tax in Maine, at least for half of Maine. So there we go.
I like it. We could actually, maybe Tucker will advocate for us, because I think we could drop his state income tax down to 0 from like 8 or 9, wherever they're going to leave it after this session. Yes, sir.
Maybe we can get most of the country to secede and join New Hampshire.
The Republic of Acadia. That's the name I'm workshopping.
First, suggest that this 30/70 information inefficiency in Maine. I would think Trump would be a great person to exploit that, and I think, especially given his little spat with the governor recently, he'd probably have a lot of incentive to do it. So I don't know. I don't have any personal connection to Trump. Maybe Angela could tell him, but I think that would be something that would be valuable to do.
Yeah, and we have, I certainly have some friends in the Trump administration, and I think that the best thing that the governor ever did for the state of Maine was pick that fight with Trump, because he put her laser focused on all the spending and corruption in the state of Maine. I would just say to that, things take time. So whether it's, getting a U.S. attorney there to prosecute some of the corruption that we've exposed, that hasn't happened yet. We need a U.S. attorney really badly in Maine for the DOJ to take on some of this. Similarly, for the private sector organized crime as opposed to the public sector, it's going to take some time for the DOJ to get to work. I'm optimistic that it will, but I would agree that the bully pulpit could help with this, as you said, this information asymmetry or inefficiency, because that's really what we have. And like poll after poll after poll finds that there's just this hardcore extreme group of people that's like 25 to 30% of the state, and they support these hard left positions, which just so happen to be all of the positions that are becoming law. So it's a real conundrum. Like, if these positions are only supported by a fringe minority, why are they positions supported by the governor, every single Democratic lawmaker, and every single left-leaning city councilor? It's an inefficiency that we're hoping to solve with the Maine Wire by bringing attention to it.
David Friedman would call that rational ignorance, I think.
Yeah, rational, or they're making money.
My question, I was just in passing, my question, I hope you don't mind a general journalism question. I was wondering if you put any thought into why journalists seem to be so enamored. I mean, I get it with Hollywood people, they don't actually work for a living, but, and they get all this free money and they feel guilty. But journalists, I don't know if you put any thought into why journalists are so socialist, leftist leaning. They push for it. It's absolutely amazing. And if you have thoughts on that, is there anything we can do about it? I mean, you can't have a government agency involved in overseeing journalism. So, is there anything that can be done about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I have thought a lot about. I would say that it's been said that journalism is like Hollywood, but for ugly people. It attracts, like if you've seen CNN or MSNBC, it kind of attracts the same personality type. So I think that part of that is just human nature. But if you're in favor of big government programs and you don't question these grand schemes that come out of the State House or Washington, D.C., if someone comes up with an idea and brings it to you and says, we're going to fix healthcare. We've got this great plan. It's called the Affordable Care Act. We're going to fix healthcare, and nobody's ever going to go without healthcare ever again. And you're the journalist who says, politician X is going to fix healthcare. This is going to be great. Well, you're going to make more friends with politician X, and you're going to get invited to parties. And politician X is also going to feed you information. And he might be using you, but in your mind, you think to yourself, well, hey, I'm getting this great information. I'm now like the exclusive guy. It works when it's pure political offices, but also like the deep state. If someone is a reporter at NBC, for example, like Ken Delanian, he's getting scoops fed to him by someone at the CIA, a CIA source, and he can go out and says, the intelligence community says X, Y, and Z. Who cares if it's true? People are going to click on it, and he can build his career around it. If he questions power, he's not going to get those stories leaked to him in the same way.
So you're saying that the concentration of power is what...
It's intoxicating. It's intoxicating for people. There's a lot of journalists who just like
that can be done
it's
about
access journalism. Build your own models. Build your own models that don't rely on them. I think the answer to speech that you disagree with is just bigger, better speech. Fortunately, these people they're really bad at journalism and they're lazy. So you can build models that outfox them. Yes, ma'am. I'll be quick.
Last question.
And if we don't finish this up, we can chat later.
Yeah.
I live in Georgetown on the coast, on the same road as Angus King. I got so excited, no King's rally. I was like, bring it, and then that wasn't it at all. But I'm originally from New Hampshire, and I brought that libertarian bias. And of course,
did the reverse breaky.
It's been totally demoralizing. And living in a fishing community is rural. It's super purple. It's completely divided. And I'm a huge fan of the secession and join the CD2, which I'm not in and will then be totally orphaned by. I would love to hear your thoughts, and this is such a big question, I don't have to get into it here completely, but if that happens, and then the coast is now orphaned, like people are coming up, these summer people, they don't realize they're visiting a theme park. Like there's no Maine there anymore. And what happens when everything that supports this illusion falls apart? We're not California. We don't have the money. We don't have the climate 8 months of the year. Can that sustain? Or would that movement break the back? And who knows? But is there a possibility that we could break the back of this monster?
Well, I think that the left-wing answer to that, and I've said that the long-term vision of the left in Maine is for it to be kind of like an enclave of elite progressives on the coast in their mansions, and then the rest of the state is a big wilderness preserve speckled with refugee camps. And migrant labor is really their solution. They want to bring in seasonal migrant labor. They want to benefit from open borders. They want to have, they've stated it publicly, that the goal is to have a generous welfare system in the interior of the state to take the jobs, cleaning their mansions or mowing their lawns. So they really, bizarrely, the people who are all about social equality and the equality of conditions are actually working towards a system that's, effectively has just serfs, migrant serfs, ethnic minorities in the state who are coming and taking care of their elite liberal enclave. So it's a dark vision. It's a system that I don't think will work. I think it will break, and hopefully we're there to pick up the pieces. But thank you very much, everybody, for listening to me. And thank you, Eric, for inviting me to speak.